Yo, 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 what's up, fam? We are back. It's Actuali podcast, and it's Meaning Making 101, our special series covering John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
And today we are covering episode 34 on sacredness, horror, music, and the symbol. This is a cool episode. These episodes keep getting better and better and better. And we're very excited to have you joining us on this learning journey. Mr. DJ is going to help us go over the previous episode while I get things running here.
Yeah, so let's see where to start. Okay, so we learned about problem solving, insight, categorization, demonstrative reference, consciousness, working memory, inference, communication, and these are all things that are going into relevance realization. You know, this little chart that he uses over and over again, which then we get emergent functions out of that, like the complexification of self-transcendence, self-deception, so bullshitting yourself can come out of relevance realization.
Yep. And what's up, Facebook? We just went live on Facebook. Welcome to the show, guys. We're just reviewing our previous episode. Thank you for joining.
So yeah, self-deception, connectedness, like connected to other people and other things, like a deep connectedness to them. We have perspectival knowing as an emergent function, participatory knowing, procedural knowing, carrying significance, altered states of consciousness, and higher states of consciousness. These are all the emergent functions that we're getting out of RR. Briefly talked about fundamental framing. Okay, let's see.
RR is in relevance realization.
Yes, yeah, because I'm not going to keep saying relevance realization.
Yeah, so whenever we say RR, that's what that means.
So relevance realization, or RR, is comes before everything else and after everything else. So it's preconceptual, pre-propositional, pre-inferential, before communication, and before you experience as well. So pre-experiential. Because in order to, say, like, you can't be taught relevance realization by somebody. You can be helped along the way, of course, but it's not something that is a taught function. Oh boy, yeah, sorry, my brain's not doing too good today. I'm quitting smoking and I've been in the sun all day, so I'm like,
Good for you, brother. That's a big one. That's a hard one. Vervaeke has been encouraging the heck out of us. We are making those life changes, man.
Yeah, so basically we have two sides to our chart, the prerequisites and then the emergent functions. And then there's some messiness because everything's self-informing and building back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and all that jazz. We talked about Acosta, and I think the book Joys of Secularism, where he discussed this wonder is central into what matters. And then there's this term bubble of meaning. Is that meaningness or meaningfulness? Or an a atmosphere of significance, rhythm of breathing. So the rhythm of breathing specifically is, like, you can see what your brain is doing when it's going under compression, and then it's particularizing, and then compressing again and particularizing.
I remember this. So you're on to the particularization.
Acosta. Joys of Secularism.
Here we are. I found you. Wonder is central to our experience of reality. The very ordinary fact that things always, quote unquote, matter to us. We cannot help but relate as though everything is meaningful. We're immersed in an atmosphere of significance. This is what our relevance realization is doing for us. We're absorbed by You're saying the rhythm of breathing, the assimilation and the congregation, the experience of having a world has relationship or has relation with a bubble of significance, such as atmosphere of Earth.
Yeah, and
Oh
you're
yeah,
not having having a world as a focal object. It's being in it as much as you are participating in this atmosphere by breathing it in and breathing it out.
there we go. That makes sense.
Yeah.
This creates a primordial ground that grants a sense of in and out. So transjectivity, sorry, pre-object and pre-subject.
Yeah.
We're recognizing that wonder and awe, as well as absurdity and horror, are transjective. They're deeper than our sense of the objective or even the subjective. They come before. Wonder is that state in which we become aware of the significance of our involvement, commitment to this atmosphere of relevance realization that we're taking part in. So Costa is invoking the spiritual way we live within, move, and have our being. So here, Vervaeke is trying to describe, through secular language, a sense of the sacred or a sense of spiritual experience that we hear so much of in the theistic world. And he's doing so because we're trying to prove the worthwhileness of mindfulness practices, of altered states and higher states of consciousness, and helping human beings attune to their environments.
So we're introduced to a word, religio,
Oh yeah.
just to bind together in a it's like a pre-egoic binding that grounds the self in the world, or grounds the self and the world. Fuller, who wrote a book called Wonder,
On wonder. Yeah.
argues wonder is responsible for religio by
The deepest experiences we can have.
yeah.
Yeah.
He does this by explaining the functioning of wonder. So wonder is awe, which is a being mode function,
Overlaps with awe. Yeah, it's definitely in the being mode.
and and it has a scaling up function too, where he gets into curiosity, which is in the having mode. Curiosity is manipulative, and like, what is that? I want to figure that out. I want to get into that. I want to muss around with that. Whereas awe is just like, or wonders opens you up, and the point of wonder is to get us into the gestalt state, seeing everything all together. Like, what are the things that you experience wonder from? Well, when you're on when you're on a precipice and you're seeing say maybe like the huge horizon or something like
Beautiful
that.
mountain range.
And then you're trying to pick it all together. And then when you're curious, you're looking at the paths to try to get down into it, or
Getting
whatever,
more into the particulars, aren't
Yeah,
you?
so-
yeah.
So
The point of wonder is to participate in the gestalt, the whole, the inexhaustibleness, and ongoing adaptability of our relevance realization to that explosive sense of reality. So the relevance realization, RR, it's about sati, which is remembering by being in touch with the religio. So we have the word da'ath, the sense of co-creating with the world, not as a story, but as something deeper. It can be talked about kind of in story terms, but it is something deeper.
I guess he's saying religio comes from what you would say is the right hand side of this chart he's been using, but the emergent side, but it's dependent upon the prerequisite side.
That's right.
As well.
And if you look at the previous episode, you'll see the chart that he's drawing up on the whiteboard as he does this. So we're seeing all the neurological properties that play into relevance realization.
Yeah, so awe and wonder are accommodations, being mode, sati, confronting a mystery, and in this case, a phenomenological mystery.
Yes.
Vervaeke talked about opening of framing. So like the idea is you have a framing, and then you have insight. What is that? Insight, sensibility, transcendence, trajectory of transcendence, of transframing. Man, he
A
gets me.
trajectory of transframing.
Yes, thank you, man. He gets me with these words, man.
He's so pinpoint with his language.
And so, like the opening of framing, imagine one frame, put a frame around that, put a frame around that, and the action and movement of framing out.
Yeah, so it's like what happens is we frame a problem, but then we have an insight, and so we create a new
Yeah.
frame, but then we have another insight, and that creates a more encompassing frame.
Yeah.
And that goes on and on and on. It's impossible to perspectively have a framing of one's own death,
Yeah.
but we can make a perspectival frame of relevance realization. So we have that opening up to insight as we're reframing. It's not an insight just about a problem, but it's also an insight into our own misframing. So it's like both at once. And that's the trajectory of transframing. So it's like we're continually transcending our initial frames and reinforming ourselves and how we mistakenly got to the previous frame we're even seeing. And so we create a new frame that helps us to grip onto reality more optimally. And we find flow deeply meaningful. So we know this is like deeply built into our biology. I and me are aspects that we can bring into view. Isn't that interesting that we can bring our sense of I or the sense of me into view? But whatever generates that sense of I and me, we can't see. Just like you can't see the I by means of your own eye. You can't,
Yeah, you can't look at, well, without mirrors or other
Without
such
a mirror,
things, you
yeah.
can't directly look at your own eye.
We're always seeing through the I of the me from frame to frame. So relevance realization grounds and makes possible objective and subjectivity
But
in the first place.
we're stuck using the language of or the grammar of objective and subjective, even
That's
though
right.
it's not objective or subjective, because it's pre-objective and pre-subjective.
Yes.
Because in order to realize the object, you have to have you have to go through RR.
Yeah, you have to go through the relevance realization. So it's like we can't quite use conceptual categories to talk about this. We can point at it, though, and the words are the best that we've got. But I love the sense that transjective is beyond objective and subjective. It's before, it's beyond, it transcends. So we're trying to understand the difference between the different kinds of knowing that humans have in our human awareness, and how we can and can't bridge between these different kinds of knowing, the perspectival, the participatory, and so on. Mm-hmm. Mystery itself opens up an affordance for perspectival wonder and awe experiences. So we can get into transjective trajectory and experience flow in religious practice, or by celebrating and enacting Religio itself.
Yeah, regardless of whether it's actually religious or secular. So
That's right. It's good for us regardless.
yeah,
What's missing here is a clear way to confront the sacred.
and so yeah, so the different and yeah, so what's missing in religio versus religion is the sacred.
Yeah.
Because you have the sacred, which is a metaphysical proposal that the proposal is there's something supernatural
Yes.
about it.
That's right. And there's
Whereas,
an ongoing theological debate about this.
yeah, whereas sacredness is a psycho-existential proposal.
What's it like to experience the sacred is what sacredness is interested in. Yeah.
So I guess it was Schleiermacher
Schleiermacher.
decided to leave behind the sacred as far as the metaphysical proposal and the supernatural thing, and go towards the sacredness when trying to figure this whole thing out.
Yeah, because we're trying to understand, okay, so what is this existential sense, this being mode through which we can experience sacredness? What is the psychological and cognitive processing? embodiment and the embeddedness of Religio that allows this to be possible for us. What is relevance realization doing? Why is it allowing us to experience sacredness? How the world, because sacredness, we do find it homes us. It homes the world and us together. And that's in contrast to a sense of domicile, a sense of deep loneliness that comes from cultural shock and a sense of homelessness, a loss of the sense of the sacred. And we're experiencing so much domicile in our world today. We're all feeling increasingly destabilized by all of the rampant ongoing division and cultural chaos and seeming civilizational breakdown. So this does cause deep loneliness and a deep sense of meaninglessness. And where's the sense of home? Everyone's looking for it. And fortunately, there's a countercurrent of people finding home in beautiful ways that are sharing it with the world again. And so we're seeing this upsurge and this downward spiral happening at once, this yin and the yang play as the human beings calibrate to this new realization. So we know sacredness, the sense of the sacred, protects us from domicile, homes us against horror. It seems to be one of the functions of the sacred, according to Gertz.
And Gertz also said that religion isn't a set of meanings, I think, if I'm getting this right, but a set of meta meanings.
That's right.
And I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, the sacred is meta meaningful. It's dependent on the transjective relationship of the agent and arena. So it's dependent on the individual finding a way to work out a sense of meta meaning making. This homes us against alienation, absurdity, and anxiety. And we recognize that there's serious play with sacredness. In rituals and communal worship and things like that. We reliably find that Religio protects people against the sense of domicile. And meaning, we often find it in spiritual communities. And this does allow for us to increase our worldview attunement, which basically means that we are tuning ourselves into a better, more calibrated relationship with reality. And again, in this process, it's all dependent on that transjective relation, that reciprocal realization that we're having with reality, this co-creative dance that we can get into in reality, that we're engaging on a deeper level that is both before and transcends our normal, I guess you could say normal, or other modes of interacting with our environments, more separate sense of reality, you could say. So Gnosticism, we remember, was trying to awaken us to mystery and the primordiality of the sacred. Primordial.
I guess I say primordiality, but he says primordiality.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a Canadian thing or if that's the way you're supposed to say it, or if it's just easier to say it that way opposed to primordiality.
It sounds like it might just be easier, right? Because we do that with a lot of words in English. We throw that little jut in there, don't we?
Yeah.
So it's also trying to overturn our grammar of a worldview in a transgressive sense. So the approach of trying to awaken us to mystery and the primordiality of the sacred, which means that it's primordial, it's existed always, far before everything. So the experience of the numinous, we get into Otto here at this point. The numinous rather than holy.
Yeah.
Because the numinous describes that primordial experience from its most fundamental transgressive level, whereas holy is pointing more towards
holy
traditionally.
Holy could be talking about your health. It could be talking about like the glory of God. It could be talking about moral righteousness. It could be talking about there's divots in a field, holy field.
So we use the word numinous here because it's more targeted, and it's also a more secular use of the term. So you can talk about this scientifically as well. And that's what Vervaeke is trying to do here, is help us bridge the gap between the sacred sense of the sacred and science, which broke apart like 2,000 years ago, and that has been degrading ever since, that relationship that science and spirituality used to have.
Well, I don't think it was 2,000 years ago. I would have to say probably like the Black Death. Because for a long time, the place where scientists were where religion was, your monasteries and your stuff like that. And then, well, Martin Luther came along and was like, screw that, tear down all the monasteries. We are really separating
That's
this.
certainly where it really started to ramp up. Vervaeke takes us far back in history, and he starts showing us little clues and points to where things started to change and pull apart. But DJ is right, it really started to become super apparent around the time of the Industrial Revolution, even. So here we are. I think that catches us up on the previous episode. That's all the notes I have.
Yep, that's all my notes.
Sweet. All right, fam. Hope y'all are ready for another deeply profound episode of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. We're about to jump into it here. And we encourage you guys to like and subscribe if you enjoy what we're doing here. We're just trying to share this knowledge with more people. It's helped us tremendously. And so go on and share it with others if you like. And also give John Vervaeke a like and subscribe and check out his channel, because there's so much more going on that comes after this Awakening series. All right, so here we are. We jump in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time I tried to develop with you the right side of the plausibility argument I'm making, and tried to give an account of central features of human spirituality, and to try not use that term therefore in a vague, indefinite way. And I made an argument for how relevance realization can explain many of the facets that are found within the normal attribution of human spirituality. And I proposed a term, Religio, to cover all of those aspects of spirituality that can be explained by the machinery of relevance realization. There was, of course, an important lacuna. There was something that was still missing from that account. And this was the account of the sacred. And then I proposed to you, in order to avoid confusion, especially post-Schleiermacher, that we should make a distinction between the metaphysical proposal of the ground or the cause of the experience of sacredness, where Schleiermacher is emphasizing the experience, and then for reasons of the way my argument has unfolded, since I'm talking about the psycho-existential machinery of sacredness as opposed to the metaphysical proposal, at least initially, that is where I should begin. So I'm talking now, we began to speak about a way of using the theoretical machinery we have developed here in order to talk about sacredness. And we began by going to the work that we'd already talked about domicide, back to the work of Geertz. And we talked about the sacredness. One of the ways it functions, one of the ways we can experience it, is that it functions as a meta-meaning system that affords worldview attunement and thereby homes us against horror. But then I noted that, of course, in the Hellenistic domicide, there was not only the machinery that attempted to rehome us, like the syncretic religions, and one could probably argue also Stoicism, as I've already argued, but there was an alternative response, which was the transgressive response of the Gnostics, ultimately. And I then said that gives us an opening into another aspect of sacredness, and this is the work of Otto and his book that, as I mentioned, was typically entitled The Idea of the Holy, and I said a better translation would perhaps be The Experience of the Numinous. And what Otto was proposing is that before we had a moral interpretation of holiness, there was a pre-moral view of what I'm calling sacredness, and this, or at least an aspect of sacredness, I should say. And what Otto was pointing to was the experience of the numinous, which is closely related to the adjective that is most applied to God, for example, in the Old Testament, which is glorious. God is shining and overwhelming and powerful, but glory does not carry with it any moral sense. In fact, one way of interpreting what's going on in the book of Job is a contrast between some of Job's moral arguments about his suffering, and God's response is to present his glory and how numinous he is. And so you're seeing sort of a conflict between these different aspects of holiness in Job. Of course, that's not all that's happening in the book of Job, and perhaps when I speak of Jung, we'll get back to that. But right now what I want to pick up on is this insight by Otto that a part of sacredness seems to be the experience of the numinous. And the numinous seems to be transgressive in an important way. It seems to be, in fact, it seems to be taking us into the heart of the very thing that the Geertzian model of sacredness was supposed to home us against, which is experiences that border on horror. Now, Otto describes this experience of the numinous as having three central aspects to it. It is a mystery, very much in the way I argued last time, the sense that we got from Marcel of something that brings about sensibility transcendence, that sort of trajectory of transframing. And then it has two opposing poles in it which make a lot of sense, I think, given what we've built together here. One is that it is deeply fascinating. It compels. So a good way of, I think, a very plausible way of understanding is this is super salient to you. It is really grabbing your attention, involving you. You can't pull away. So it's super salient. And then the other is, he said, it's terrifying, it's horrifying. There's an aspect of horror to this. Now, I got to stop for a minute. I don't want to use the word terror. It goes back to his original term. But the problem with terror is, of course, it has become deeply enmeshed with us with notions of terrorism, and I want to put that aside. I'm going to use the word horror because it doesn't have that kind of association. But I have to now distance how I want to use this word from how it's become typically used by us. So I once mentioned to you that most mystery novels and mystery movies aren't mysterious at all. They don't have you confront mystery, they give you just a difficult problem to solve. And in that sense, they're instances of a kind of important modal confusion that is pervasive in our culture. The same thing with many horror movies. Many horror movies do not actually expose you to horror. Many horror movies actually expose you to being deeply startled with fear. Okay, so deeply startled with fear. So much of what passes for horror movies are movies that prey on our sort of ancestral fear of predation. So that where there's some monster that although the monster points towards something, and I'll come back to that, and this is work, of course, made by good work done by Jonathan Pajot on how we should think about monsters. We'll come back to that. And the monster is basically hidden in some way or unknown, and it's preying upon people, and most of what's called horror is how the surprising way in which the monster will suddenly appear and prey upon its victims, and then they get ripped apart. So you were startled, oh no, ah, right, and most of that is not horror. I mean, I imagine it has. I find those movies boring, actually. I understand why some people. This is just a statement of taste. I don't find them very interesting. Those sort of startle and puncture movies don't appeal to me. And they're often enmeshed also with sort of crypto messages about sexuality and things like that that need to be challenged. Putting all of that aside, right? So when I say horror, you have to. There's a few movies that capture it, because horror has to do with what we talked about with respect to Geertz. Horror is when your sense of contact with reality is being challenged, undermined, where you feel you have a grasp on things and then it's slipping away. So horror, therefore, is often prototypically not associated with fear or directly with fear. It's associated with insanity or madness. And of course, there is the primordial fear of becoming insane, right? Now, the monster points to something very, very interesting, and this goes back to the work of Mary Douglas, right? That we often find creatures that are intercategorical for us monstrous, because that's on a continuum with another important feature of things being intercategorical. So what is meant by intercategorical? Intercategorical are things that don't fall into our ready-made categories, and therefore we typically regard them as weird. She talks about how they're unclean. She does an interesting discussion about, in the Bible, the book of Leviticus, all the animals that are unclean. They're very weird. It's a very weird collection. If you tried to find some sort of essence, like why owls are unclean and crocodiles are unclean and whatever, and certain birds are unclean and certain, it doesn't make any sense. And then she goes in and argues, well, no, what happens is there's various ways in which there's ways in which people have categorized things, and those categories, right, have a certain pattern. And when that pattern is being broken, then these things challenge our grip on the world. They challenge our grip on the world. So, for example, like there's the idea, Douglas argues, that you should have an interconnection between a creature's sort of shape, its morphology, its means of locomotion, and its location, like where it lives. So if it lives in the sea, it should swim, and therefore it should have a fish shape. So you have things that are in the sea that don't seem to be swimming, like the crawly shellfish, and therefore they're kind of weird, and they turn out to be unclean. And then you also have this same, she argues, this same schema is applied. Now we think, oh, those archaic, ancient people. No, but remember, don't do that, because we talked about how we also have purity codes. We find things unclean that thwart our system of categorization. So, remember, if I take this and spit into it repeatedly and then swirl it around and drink it back, you're grossed out. That's unclean to you, because I have this whole structural functional organization, a way of categorizing myself and my self's relationship to my body and how that's other than the environment, and then there's important boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. And when the spit comes out of me, it becomes intercategorical. It's me, but it's not me, because it's not inside me, but it's outside of me, but somehow it was produced, and it's intercategorical, it's yucky, and get rid of it, right? So this is not a feature of ancient thought. This is a way in which we respond to things that violate our core categorical ways of making sense of the world. Now, some of those things we just regard as yucky or gross or unclean. But if the intercategorical thing is intercategorical between really, really central categories, and it is represented as threatening to us, then it originally invoked horror for us. So if you take a look at many horror creatures, they're prototypically intercategorical. right? The wolf man is intercategorical between the bestial and the personal, right? The ghost is intercategorical between the living and the dead. The vampire is also intercategorical between the living and the dead, and also between, right, being alive in the sense of consuming and being alive in the sense of being able to be generative, because of course the vampires consume and do not produce. And so, and of course, there's the work that Christopher Mastropietro and Philip Misevic and I did, and Jonathan Pajot ultimately, independently, did work on the zombie and how the zombie is an intercategorical monster to represent our current situation, the meaning crisis. And you're going to see a video of Chris Mastropietro and I talking about all of that, so I won't get that into detail. So the fact that the monster is intercategorical points, right, and that intercategoricalness can be on a spectrum from just ooh, yucky to losing a grip on reality and intelligibility, because of the deep connectedness between realness and intelligibility. This points, right, again, to the connection to madness, and all of this points to losing a grip, losing that contact, that comprehensive grip, losing that optimal grip on reality. So you can create pretty significant horror without having to do the startle and puncture moment. I want to relate one to you where I've had the most prototypical and salient example of an experience of horror that had nothing to do with sort of the prototypical being something jumping out of the shadow with sharp pointy bits. So I was watching Kubrick's The Shining. Many of you have probably seen it. If you haven't seen it, of course, there's been 10,000 memes about it. It's pervasive throughout popular media. And my own intellectual arrogance contributed to the aesthetics of the horror. I was watching this movie, and spoilers here, but this movie's been around for a long time, so I think it's fair game. I was watching this movie, and I'm watching this character, and he seems to be going mad, the Jack Nicholson character, and that in and of itself is very interesting, and of course evocative of all of this. And then I'm getting, oh, right, Stephen King, right, has some sort of deep criticisms of alcoholism, and so this is a very extended metaphor for the descent through alcoholism into madness. And then I was patting myself on my back. I get this movie. It's just a symbolic way of talking about alcoholism and everything. And he's hearing voices in his head. Oh, that's a clear sense of madness. And I had it all well structured, well in hand, as we say. And then there's a scene where his wife actually traps Jack Nicholson inside some sort of pantry and locks it from the outside. And then I remember sort of coming to sort of a full stop, and I'm like, what's going to happen now? She's trapped him. He's locked in. That's it. And the voices are talking to him in his head, and I'm sort of dismissing that because, yeah, he's mad. He's going to talk to the voices. But so what? And the voices are sort of in his head are sort of chiding him, and what do you do? How'd you let it get to this? And I'm going, yeah, you're mad, and you're going to spiral into insanity. Great, and everything. And then the voices say, okay, it's time to go. And then the voices say, now we're going to let you out. And then they open the door from the outside. The voices in his head. And a chill went down my spine because I realized, oh, I'm in a much different world than I thought I was in. I thought I had this completely down. And no, these voices have an independent reality, and there's something else going on here. Now, nothing startling was happening. All they were doing was opening the door so he could get out. But it was an absolute chill of horror going through me because, right, and that's the most profound experience of horror I've ever had in a movie, precisely because what had happened there was I went from being out here looking at all of this to, I don't know what's going on, and I was suddenly participating in his madness because I didn't know what was going on, and I was losing a grip on the situation, and there were forces at work here that I didn't understand. That's horror. Okay, that's horror. And I mean, I think there's situations that bring people into genuine horror, but I think it's much rarer than we realize. All right. So given that, and like I said, we will return to talk about this later, given the sense of horror as being, the polar extreme of this continuum of the weirdness, the eeriness, the yuckiness of the intercategorical, the spaces in our grip on reality through which things can slip, right? We can return to this. So the numinous is super salient. There's almost something like a flow state in that we're being drawn into it. But it also has with it aspects of horror. It shakes at the structure of our worldview. Now you say, whoa, like what's an example of this? Okay, so here's an example of, or I think where people brush up against the numinous. And it's fairly widespread, so many of you will have encountered it. It's one that I find, I guess, annoying because I find it dangerous. So this happens. You're driving home, and there's been an accident on the highway. And people are slowing down. It's very dangerous to slow down. Everybody knows you shouldn't slow down like that because it's dangerous to slow down. Because the chances are you're going to cause another accident, which does, in fact, frequently happen. But nevertheless, people feel compelled to slow down. They are fascinated by this because they hope to see something horrifying. Not just disgusting. They're hoping that they will see death. That they'll somehow get a confrontation with this. And that, of course, is horrifying because death has the capacity to, the confrontation with the threat of death, the presence of death, has the possibility to completely sever your grip on reality. Literally, in fact, right? But they can't look away. But if they see something, they have the potential of being very unpleasantly horrified. But of course, there's something also missing in this because they can't actually see death. Right? They can see the fact of death in the sense of the result of something or someone dying, but that won't actually put them into something we've already discussed. That won't actually give them what they want, a grip on the mystery of death, the phenomenological mystery of death. And that tells you something, right? Wonder and awe have us open up to mystery, but if the mystery becomes overwhelming, if it causes us to lose any potential sense, any sense of our potential ability to get, right, an insight or an understanding that typically comes with wonder, right? Awe is sort of liminal. But with horror, it's like, it's expanding so fast, and I'm getting overwhelmed so fast, I'm being forced to accommodate so fast, this is like the absolute worst culture shock, and I'm experiencing horror.
Okay. Time for a break, guys.
The horror.
Getting a little intense there, wasn't it?
So Otto, before moral interpretation, there was an experience of the numinous.
That's right.
So before we, had an interpretation for our morals, there was this experience of this.
Yes.
Not the holy, but the numinous.
Yeah, there's a moral notion of sacredness from our ancient past. And this experience of the numinous is akin to what we use the word glory for. It's close to that. So a sense of overwhelming brightness almost. That's the term. That's what the word glory means in ancient Hebrew when they're referring to God. It's just this brilliant, blinding light. The glory of God. That's what the glory points to. So the numinous It's given us, well, it's a transgressive term and experience, in particularly important ways, because Numinous encounters us with a mystery, or the mystery, and a mystery that is so deeply fascinating that it is super salient to us in a way that grabs and holds our attention. It's almost like the dark side of flow state. It's pulling you in and grabbing you into something that kind of takes you over. So it can be, the numinous can be terrifying. There can be horrifying aspects to it. And when we're talking horror, we're talking about not like just scary monsters and the fear of predation.
Well, not necessarily just startling either.
Not necessarily startling, fearful things or anything like that either. Horror is when our sense of contact with reality is severely undermined. It's like it's closer to a sense of insanity or madness.
Yeah. Well, there's something important to realize about the monster and why we use monsters, and why we find them terrifying. So the intercategorical, and so it does not fall into pre-made categories, breaks down your pre-existing patterns for what should be.
That's right.
He brought up like a triad, which would be morphology, locomotion, and habitat, right? So you got the shape of the creature, how the creature moves around in the habitat, and if you change it, any one of these things, it can make you feel uneasy. And even
the shape, the morphology, or the location.
Well, and to go, not just like a, monster with claws or goopiness or whatever, but even like, say, a parent. What should a parent be? A parent should, be caretaker, protector,
guide, and guardian.
And if it breaks down, and say you have a horrible parent that doesn't protect you but actively harms you,
sometimes turns into a monster unexpectedly.
Yeah, and that is horror. I would venture to say most people, when they experience true horror, is probably at the hands of somebody else becoming a monster because of the breakdown of one of these things. Well, if say if it's a parent, then it has that mode. But say if it's a lover or a spouse or something like that, and then it breaks down because like say finding out your spouse has been cheating on you with your brother or something like that.
Yeah, right.
That
there you go.
There is a certain amount of madness and horror that you will go through.
Yeah,
that
it's so counter to any normal expectations you would have about reality.
Yeah.
So it almost makes you feel insane.
Yeah. So if you go, or the further you go into this mismatching of the categories that should be, the more monstrous something becomes. And you can think of it like, sense. Visually, like if any of y'all are familiar with Cthulhu and that whole mythos, but basically he's supposed to be this before the gods ancient one, one of the primordial beings of the universe. And if you look upon him, you immediately go mad. But, there's pictures of him, and it's, really big dude with a cephalopod head, which is terrifying. You see this, it's like, well, a squid shouldn't have a body. And it shouldn't be really big. And it shouldn't be magical.
Yeah.
And there's something about, like tentacled creatures coming up from the depths that's terrifying.
That is like, terrifying.
Things should have legs and hands and feet, not...
So that mismatch that takes it out of traditional categories. So Wolfman or a ghost, which is halfway between alive but it's not all the way gone dead. It's somehow in between. Vampire, zombies. These things that are in between, and so that's why they have a horrifying aspect to them.
Yeah, and particularly the zombie one. Zombies are terrifying because, well, they used to be humans. Now they look like a human. They don't function like a human. They don't talk anymore. They eat other humans, which is a no-no for
like
humans.
They're mindless and they're heartless now, and they only have one mission, which is to eat other humans.
Yeah, then
it's strange. They should be dead. You can't kill them easily unless you chop off the head. You know, so you shoot it a bunch of times, it keeps coming at you.
And depending on the type
Everything
of
is counter
zombie,
to
the
what
body
should
will just
happen.
keep going. You know, if
Yeah.
it's a certain types of zombies. So
Yeah.
it's just like,
So everything is upsetting and destabilizing the sense of normal reality. Everything is going against the rules. So this is what horrifying is to us.
you know, and the fact that the monster is intercategorical points to the madness, the losing your grip on reality. And you know, actually, his example of The Shining, and how, you know, it's like, oh well, it's a metaphor for alcoholism. You know, of course.
Yeah, he thinks he's got it figured out. He sees this guy going progressively more mad as he's starting to drink more and more and more. And he's like, okay, well, I know Stephen King has issues with alcoholism. He doesn't like it. So this seems to be, that's what's going on in this story. I've got this figured out. And he's giving himself like the pat on the back.
But the moment he's, you know, it's like, okay, well, how is he going to get out of this? And
Well, he gets trapped.
Yeah,
He gets trapped in a pantry.
and mind you, there's
by his
nothing
wife.
supernatural in this movie. It's just a man going insane.
Right.
And then, well, there's, you know, there's
Maybe.
there's the son who's, you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, see, that's
Not
just
here
it.
right
But then there's
now.
something else happening that is like counter to that. That seems like, wait, there's something supernatural happening here. So what happens is Jack gets trapped in the pantry, and then the voices are like chattering to him again, and Vervaeke thinks he's got it figured out and all that. But then the voices say, okay, we're going to open the door now. And then the door opens. And a chill runs down Vervaeke's spine because his entire field of expectations has been totally upset, totally turned on its head. He doesn't understand anything now. Now he's no longer just a watcher of the story.
He's
now a participant in the madness and experiencing it. And that was a brilliant point of that movie. That was horrifying.
Yeah.
So that gives you, in a nutshell, the definition of what horror
horror
actually
is.
is. It's a very rare thing. It doesn't happen that often.
The
to us.
numinous is super salient and horrible. And with this explanation
Can
of
be.
what horrible it is, it's like, yes, well, if you, you know, confront God to its face, it's going to break all your preconceptions of what you can conceive of as God. When you have this experience with, you know, call it the divine, the holy, you know, God, whatever, the numinous, it is going to break down every expectation you've ever had.
I try to put it as terrifyingly beautiful, like more beautiful than you can stand.
Yeah,
Overwhelmingly
not
so.
horrible in the sense of
Disruptive
murderous,
of
but
any pattern of
yeah.
beauty you've ever seen. It's so much more than you even thought could be possible. It disrupts your normal sense of reality. It's overwhelming. And so he's about to get into why the numinous can be both awesome or awful. And that word awe is going to key us into why we're talking about horror right now, and why awe has a horrifying aspect to it, but also has an overwhelmingly beautiful aspect to it.
And his example of, like, you know, the you know, a wreck on the highway and everybody slows down and rubbernecks and is trying to look, you know, it's
That's right,
it's
yeah.
like watching a slow motion train wreck. You can't look away, you're riveted, and what you're
Yeah.
riveted to is you want to see death.
Good word
but you
for it.
can't see death's mystery. You can only see the results of, you know, like a mangled body or super crunched
That's
up
right.
car. You don't see the mystery of
Yeah, you
death.
can't see death itself.
And
You
it
can see
almost
the
leaves
facts
you
of death.
hollow, like, you know, this hollow horror. Like, as if you see the body, you're like, oh, but you're looking because you want to understand death, you know. And maybe that's a something that comes from our primate end, but we tend to, you know, primates tend to, you know, everybody looks at something and it's like,
If there's a snake,
what is that? You know,
the
and
chimps
like,
will stand
yeah.
around and look at the snake and like
Point
point
it-
it to each
yeah,
other, and
yeah.
they'll go on for like 10, 20 minutes sometimes watching a snake, even though it horrifies them, because this helps us give us a grip on the mystery of death, something that we can't understand wholly. And so anything that is about death, it does rivet us oftentimes, because this could help us get more of a grip on this mystery of finality, this mystery of death that is a part of our lives. So it's something that's helping us tune into our environment a little bit better, perhaps. And so we're riveted by it. I love that you use that word. What an interesting word, riveted. Like you're riveted to, like rivets.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, things that affix.
Yeah. Gets a grip on you. All right, guys, we're going to jump back in here and continue on.
I'm back at 21:52.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and give him a little bit of a rewind here, just so that we understand where we're coming from.
Right? Awe is sort of liminal. But with horror, it's like, I'm expanding so fast, and I'm getting overwhelmed so fast. I'm being forced to accommodate so fast. This is like the absolute worst culture shock, and I'm experiencing horror. So we can think of horror is when, notice what you've got here. You've got all the indications of flow, right? Or something like flow, at least the beginning of it, right? Where you're getting drawn in this accelerating loop. Something like it, at least. Right? It's super salient to you, but it's super salient, and this is why I'm hesitating to just call it straight out flow. It's super salient, but not in the fact that you're deeply coupled. It's super salient in the way that you're seeking to be deeply coupled, and the machinery is going faster and faster, but it's not actually getting a purchase. Because what's happening is you're getting horrified by a mystery. Now it's like, wow, that's an experience of the Numinous? And if you read parts of the Bible, or you can read other literature too, but the Bible, of course, is prototypical for a lot of these people, these researchers like Otto. Like there's passages in the Old Testament in which God is like this, right? There's weird and strange and horrifying aspects of God. Fascinating, super salient, and you're drawn in, and it's like I say, I don't want to call it anti-flow because anti-flow is depression, but it's like the shadow of flow. You're trying to, and you're getting drawn in, and all the machinery of coupling is speeding up to try and get what it can't get, which is a stable relationship. And so, wonder, you don't get wonder, you might not even get awe. If it's too much, it can pass into horror. So, it's plausible that this is one of the ways of interpreting certain even commands in the Bible, like you're supposed to, it's often translated as you're supposed to fear God. And this doesn't make any sense for a lot of reasons, because God is prototypically not the object that you can run away from or fight, or like what your fear would be absurd. It doesn't make any sense. But I think a better account of this is, right, you're supposed to have awe for God. And notice how this is the basis of this word, awesome, but it's also the basis of this word, awful, right? Because it borders on horror. So there's a sense of the experience of sacredness that is supposed to take us to the very horizon of our intelligibility, the very, very precipice of our ability to make sense and make meaning of the world. It's supposed to take us, I would say, right, it's supposed to draw us in, and the hope is not to just throw us into horror, but to take us towards horror until we experience, right, that sort of boundary between awe and horror, where we are forced into a situation of confrontation with a demand to change. A demand to change who and what we are. And in that sense, this will overlap with the higher states of consciousness, in that this carries with it a sense of being terrifically real, and I mean that, terrifically real, and that, right, it is putting a demand on us to accommodate, to expand our capacity to framing, that it is pushing us to our very, very, very limits. And the aspect of horror is the sense, stronger words needed here, the realization that we are indeed finally, ultimately limited, that no matter how much we grow, we can't grow enough to encompass the mysteries that we are confronting. So the point of the horror, I think, is to get us not only to grow, but to remember that our growth will always be the growth of a mortal, limited being, a being that is always caught up in relevance realization. So, notice how I've been pushing how much this is taking you to sort of the deepest powerful accommodation, the deepest opening up, right? Forcing tremendous change on you, varying who you are. This is also an aspect of the sacred. Now think about how you can relate this on the continuum that we've been talking about. This is the ultimate frame breaking. But this isn't just breaking any frame. This is, this is transframe breaking. This is breaking your capacity for framing, or at least taking it to the very, as I said, the very limits where you are forced into a trajectory of transframing that is also acknowledging that you are ultimately insufficient. It's supposed to, in this, and I'm using this in a technical sense, it is supposed to humiliate you. The problem for us, humiliate, is that we can only hear this negatively. But of course, humility, a deep, deep appreciation of one's inescapable limitations, is part of, I've argued, the function of horror. It is to bring you to that state of accommodation, while maximal accommodation, while also deeply reminding you, sati, that you can never become, anything beyond a finite being. It's to prevent inflation. It is to prevent you ever assuming that you are more than you can ultimately be. So it's a deep kind of reminding that's put at the heart of this power. Look, if I could just sort of accommodate in wonder and awe, there's a temptation that I would inflate and think, I am, right? Now this puts you, the numinous, and therefore puts you into confrontation with something that is much greater than yourself. And also that has an existence, by definition, independent of you, precisely because of the way it can threaten you. So notice what we've got here. We've got over here, we've got, worldview, we've got the sacred doing these two things. Sacredness. Sorry, I keep slipping on that. It's just the way language drives you, eh? I fear we are not getting rid of God because we still believe in grammar. Okay, so sacredness. Over here, we have worldview attunement. And it's very clear why that would be regarded as sacred. This homes us against horror. But we've got this other notion of sacredness, which is the numinous, which is designed to do the opposite. It's designed to expose us, fascinate us. Horror with horror. So over here, we had, basically what I'm going to argue is meta-assimilation. We had that meta-meaning that is designed to get everything to fit together, to belong together. The agent and the arena fit together. But then you have the opponent process. The opponent process. And this is, as I've already argued, this is meta-accommodation. Sacredness is doing a very powerful, not at the level of your individual projects or problems. This is doing it at the level of your existential being in the world. It is doing higher order relevance realization. It is pushing the machinery of relevance realization, again, down through all of the levels of your knowing, into your existential modes, into the depths, the primordial depths of the agent-arena relationship, and then it's blowing it apart, setting it in motion with opponent processing that's doing powerful, powerful, higher order relevance realization. Sacredness, I think, is a deep way in which we are seriously playing with, and now the seriousness is at the level of awe and horror, and also home, which is also deeply serious to you. We are seriously playing with the machinery of relevance realization and pushing it towards greater and greater development of optimizing it, improving it, enhancing it. So, if that's right, if sacredness is, right, the experience of this machinery as opposed to either one of its poles, that tells us, again, about its deep functionality. That what we're doing in sacredness is we're playing with the machinery of relevance realization in order to try and create states of mind, states of body, states of interaction with the world that optimize in a comprehensive and profound manner the machinery of relevance realization, our connectedness to the world, to ourselves, and to each other. This, I would, for example, explain why music is so deeply associated with sacredness. I mean, music isn't about anything, not in a conceptual referential sense. Nevertheless, as Nietzsche said, life would be a mistake without music, because in music we are playing just with the machinery of salience landscaping, just with all of this machinery in a powerful way, for no other reason than for its own sake. We try to get into a flow state in which we are just for its own sake, seriously playing with this machinery. And that's why music is such a pivotal way in which we try to convey and represent the sacred, and why music strikes us so perspectively in such a participatory way. We don't just think about music, or right. It insinuates its way into our perspectival salience landscape, and we embody it. The rhythms and what's happening in the music becomes sewn into our processes of co-identification. The way the world as an arena is disclosed to we, and the way my agency is being structured, are being deeply transformed by music. One of the great difficulties with our culture, of course, and I suppose we need to do work on this, how it contributes to the meaning crisis, is the degree to which we have trivialized music, and the degree to which we have severed it from, at least explicitly and consciously, from its connection to the sacred. I think why many people still are so deeply dependent on music, especially when they're going through any transformative period in their life, is precisely because of the way it puts them back in touch and helps them remember, at least intuitively, some of this machinery of seriously playing with the higher order relevance realization machinery of sacredness. Now, that opens up something that we need to talk about, because I'm now invoking how we can use something that's, and we're going to have to do work on this, something that's symbolic like music, in order to play, in order to activate, accentuate, and play with this machinery in a powerfully transformative manner. And of course, religions which are which have these aspects to them also are rich with the symbolic machinery that is designed to activate and seriously play with this. So I want to talk about the relationship or the role that symbols have in our experience of sacredness.
We back. This stuff on music is getting really interesting. All right, so where?
So mystery, fascinating and horrifying.
Yes.
Super salient and flowing, but not necessarily flowing like flow state, more of a spiraling down the shadow of flow, trying to get what you can't get.
Yeah. It's you're not able to get coupled with the environment quite right. You're not able to get a purchase on what's happening entirely in your mind. It's not making sense. So that's one aspect of the numinous, that shadow of flow, not being able to get a stable relationship with reality. So if there's too much, it's not wonder, it's not awe, but it's horror. And so this gives us an insight into why in the Bible we see terms like fear God. The word, I think, that we're translating there is closer to asking us to have awe for God.
Yeah, awesomeness, awfulness.
Yeah, there can be something can be awesome and awful. It's just beyond our capacity to conceive entirely.
So the numinous takes us to the absolute edge of our ability to reason and understand, and it demands change of us.
It does, doesn't it?
Because of the realization that we are ultimately limited, very limited, particularly when you come up against something that is the greatness of God. You know, you realize how extremely limited you actually are.
Mm-hmm. Or mystery beyond our knowing, like trying to understand how the universe began. You know, so an experience of sacredness, it certainly can be terrifically real, and at the same time take us to the precipice of our experience in a way that is right there on the boundary of awe and horror, where we do also experience a demand to change who and what we are so that we can better fit to this new understanding of reality.
But, you know, it's not just
But it comes with the realization that we're also limited.
And it's humiliating in the best way
In
possible.
the best way. It humbles us.
Keeps your head from getting a little too big.
Gives us humility.
You know?
That's right. Yeah. So this is like a high level of relevance realization, but I'm jumping ahead a little bit. This does take our framing capacity to its very limits while also acknowledging our limits. So it not only inspires growth, it helps us know that we are also mortal. It humbles us.
Yeah, and the numinous puts you into contact with something greater than yourself, and also something that is separate from yourself that then can confront you, which is scary enough in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that, you know, in the past humans have created very monstrous depictions of gods, you know, very
like
strange and, you know,
warlike or thunderous, or
and that if you don't do things right, they're gonna squish you.
right.
So sacredness is the combination of worldview attunement and the numinous, or not the combination, but the opponent process between the two. One that homes us, and then one that exposes us to humiliation and horror, but in the best way. You know, it sounds really negative when you say it like that, but
But it's helping us calibrate.
Something that brings you to the very edge, but then brings you home. Brings you to the edge, but then brings you home. That's sacredness.
That's a really good way to say it. I like that. It's like this deep sense of humbling recognition, and sati, remembrance. So it's a deep recognition of our limits that prevents inflation of our egos from thinking that we are more than we can be in an unrealistic way. Like somebody that is about to jump off the top of a building thinking they can fly if they will it. What a horrifying experience if you saw someone do such a thing. Because that, of course, isn't going to work, brother. And we'd be horrified to see someone try it. So here we have that calibrating that's keeping us in a humble, measured relation with reality. And the numinous puts us in contact and confrontation with that greater than ourselves that's independent, also independent of us. So it's refining our worldview attunement, homing us against horror. It's a sense of home in the face of horror. And now we're talking about the two different sides of a sacredness.
Sacredness is numinous and worldview attunement.
Yes, both.
And they're so what I was saying before is it's sacredness is the opponent processing between, you know, coming home and then going out to your absolute edge and finding yourself lacking.
Really?
And then coming back home and then doing it again. So basically the coming home would be the meta assimilation, assimilating to the home, and the going out into the horror of things is the meta accommodation, which is this interaction is a higher order relevance realization.
Yeah.
So not just the initial relevance realization you have in your mind when you come to a realization of something, you know, that aha moment that the brain somehow does, but a higher order of that,
much higher order.
That, you know, I guess, you know, well, it's sacredness. It's, you know, it is much higher. It's not just within ourselves. It's outside of ourselves, and then outside of ourselves again, beyond even further.
Yeah, because relevance realization can be used for things as general as where's the blue dry erase marker, and then I see there's a bunch of dry erase markers. I can tell by the shape of the cap and the writing on them.
It should be in there. Oh, but it's not.
It's
not there because I loaned it out to
relevance,
you know, somebody else. Yeah,
that's the general kind. But then there's this high order relevance realization, opponent processing that our brain can also do on the level of what we have to call sacred or sacredness, which is a transjective term and a transjective experience. So we're seriously playing with relevance realization now to take it to higher levels of optimization and enhancement, optimizing ourselves to our environment, enhancing ourselves better to be able to play with our environment. So we have this deep functionality of sacredness, playing with the machinery of relevance realization to create states of mind and body interaction that further optimize relevance realization and our sense of connectedness with the world and each other. And so it's this reciprocal, recursive, co-creative processing that we see. And we find that music connects us with this somehow. Yet it isn't necessary, and it doesn't. Music itself doesn't need to mean anything particular.
Yeah, it's not about anything.
To be music.
You know, like, well, of course, there's songs about a girl,
with lyrics
or about a story,
yeah.
Or even if you get into the classical end, where you can, you know, like you can really hear
the sadness. This one must be about sadness, and maybe it's about a
but it's
thunderstorm.
just play.
But it's really doing so much more detailing of that emotion of, say, sadness than we could ever put into words, and the traveling through and in and out of all the different textures and ways sadness can present itself.
Yeah.
So it's definitely transjective as well. And we noticed, you know, or Vervaeke pointed out that Nietzsche noticed how life is a mistake without music. It doesn't seem to have any intrinsic meaning to itself, yet it's a mistake. Life would be a mistake without it. And Vervaeke pointed out that here in the midst of the meaning crisis, we notice the degree to which music has been trivialized. It was previously in our history something that was a deeply sacred practice.
Now it's just, I don't know, most of the time used to sell you on either a product or an idea, and usually anymore just
that's right. It's been used to
sex.
raise
That's
the salience
pretty
of
much
an
all
idea.
sex and doing drugs, not caring about nothing. That's what music has become in a lot of ways. Or I had this experience and trying to like relive this experience, and it's like, well, and a lot, you know, I'm not to be that guy, but I'm quitting smoking, so I'm a little grumpy right now. I'm just gonna go ahead and grump on it. Modern day music is vapid and awful. There's very little to the like, okay, listen to pop music from like the 80s, like the 70s and 80s, and how it was produced and put together very well. You know, the melodies, harmonies, you know, like, now mind you, there was crap pop then too, but like there's a lot more thought out. Now you just get this, you know, rhythmic bounce, with this gyrating sound, and then, you know, whap, 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 and it's just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, the cookie cutter approach to commercialization of music.
Well, it's not. They haven't even bothered with a cookie cutter anymore. It's just taking spoonfuls of I don't know, it's not pre-programmed. Like there is and I'm not knocking producers who make modern music or anything, but there once was a time, and maybe I wasn't alive for this time, where music was written to really have an impact on you and move you and sway you, opposed to just Yas Queen, let me get my scissor, why you can't tell me nothing.
Yeah. Just
While I'm drinking that
entertain.
moonshine, like
Yeah.
just.
But nowadays it's mostly for mere entertainment and to
Yeah.
sell something. Something salient.
Or to put our worst behaviors as the highest goals,
There's attachment to the material realm, and
I have a hard time listening to it. I listen to it and then I listen to the lyrics. I'm like, my God, you let your children listen to this? Like, not to be like one of those guys, but it's
Those
just like,
desacralizing.
remember back when we were kids and stuff, there was the parental advisories. There ain't none of that no more.
not nearly as much as there used to be. Everything is just wide open and accessible for the most part. You have to click a button to say yes, I'm this or that. But
Yeah, now it's like I'm watching commercials that are selling like Nerf guns to kids and stuff, and then you listen in the background, and you're like, wait, I think I know this song. What is that? And then you're like, oh, this isn't exactly that song, but this is still the same kind of song that's trying to tell you to twerk your butt.
They know what patterns of different beats and sounds appeal or have worked in previous songs, so they will replicate things and boil them down to.
Yeah, and it's become more rhythmic and less melodic, so
There's a lot of
only
that.
using one side of the brain opposed to using both at the same time. And
Yeah.
that's my gripe with music. I don't mean to be one of those snobs, because I'm not. I'm the last person to know any band's name or this, that, or the other. But I can hear what's on the commercials and what's popping out of people's cars and what everybody's thinking is hips and hot. And what the YouTube is trying to sell me on. It's like, oh, music. Now here's all this, and then you listen to it, and you're like,
Yeah, the trivialized is a good word for it. Music has been trivialized in our modern day. You still hear good stuff here and there.
no,
And it really
there are
stands
some
out,
really
and it
good,
becomes very special.
there are some really awesome musicians doing some really awesome stuff nowadays.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it's not
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 what's
at the
hitting most
center
mainstream.
of the cultural eye anymore.
No, and I always think about how in the '90s, for instance, our music was still so variant, and there were so many different super talented artists out there, but they were so different from one another. Yet everyone still loved them all, and so you had such a, you had your Nirvana and your Smashing Pumpkins, and then you had your Soundgarden and your Alice in Chains and Tool and some of this hard rock stuff. But then you had Red Hot Chili Peppers and Sublime and 311. And
Cake.
Cake, and it just keeps on going. And we had so
Or
much
Spin Doctors, man.
Spin Doctors were great.
Cleopatra's favorite cat. Doobity-bap-bap.
Yeah, and so and Tom Petty and on, and so you see that there's a lot of variety in the mainstream. Still, that was still making it into the mainstream, but ever since then, through the 2000s and
I don't know, everything just sounds the
10s
same
and 20s,
anymore.
Now they've certainly really continually boiled it down, and most of what makes it on the mainstream now is even more cookie cutter than it was before, and
Now
less and less original stuff is making it forward, because the music production companies, they're just betting on what they know works. They're afraid to try the new as much anymore.
The music industry as it was, back in our day, but like in the 90s and early 2000s, is dead. It's dying.
Yeah,
and it doesn't realize it's dead.
Oh, look what
yet.
happened to old hip hop. I mean, the way that hip hop started out is so different than the way it is today. It started out as this very uplifting, educational, inspiring, and good messages for people.
And also telling stories,
telling stories, truthful, honest, but it wasn't glorifying womanizing or materialism.
Well, now we got this. What is it? Drill rapping, which is basically, from what I gather, is people who shoot up people or do crimes and then them snitching on themselves. What? It's like I've heard ones where they'd be like, "Yeah, I took out this dude," and then like naming a place and a time and what they did it with, and I'm just like, yo, like, dude, come on now. Like, is this admissible in court? Like, what's going on here?
It's a strange place, and a strange time to be.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
And then you got mumble rap, and I just can't tell what they're talking about because I'm like, oh,
Then there's artfulness to some of it, but a lot of it's also just copycat.
yeah. Well,
And it's being encouraged by the music industry, the copycatting.
well, and to a certain extent, like any scene that develops because people enjoy a certain style of music and a certain thing that's going on, and they get into the movement of it, and then naturally what
Genres
they do,
expand and grow, but they're not.
And what you do musically is colored by those you listen to and those you're around and your scene, if you will.
Sure.
I get it. I just, you know,
It seems like the copycat thing is turned up though excessively, and that's most of what you see
Well,
now.
and
And it's
that-
not as much venturing out and trying something new. But mumble rap is something new. You got to give it that, right?
well, it's old at this point.
True, but it was a new form of hip hop, and it is creative in a lot of ways.
I come from the day of the rappers who would see who can, you know, spit the fastest lines the clearest, you know, like like Tech Nine, you know, that guy was fast like a Tech Nine, you know, like
Yeah, and then
just
they
like
start getting witty with it,
yeah.
and there's connected underlying deep meanings that you could read into. And
you know, you could hear a cipher 3 different ways and get 3 different meanings out of just that one little line, you know.
But nowadays, when a fad pops off, it really gets super replicated
Yeah.
to the point of banality. You know, it just gets ground down to flatness over after so much repeated reciprocating of this initial idea. It's
Yeah, and that might be a function of the fact, you know, the viral phenomenon, the fact that we have instant communication that can happen all at once, and then there seems to be this emergent quality of virality where it's like,
and the music industry is doing what it does. It's just trying to find what's making money, and then okay, let's put more of that out, and then that, of course, plays into encouraging people to do it more. You know, to feed that need. So, you know, it's what it is. But don't be afraid to be creative. I love hearing people do things that haven't been done before, or doing them in unique ways, putting their own unique spin on it. So when you see that mumble rapper that's also got an actual drummer next to him and a guy playing the sax, that's awesome, you know?
Yeah, can we
and
bring
when you
back,
see the
like,
techno
real
band that's actually
instruments?
doing everything live instead of just sampling, they have a drummer, they have instrumentalists, and, you know, we can play around here. We got plenty of room to grow, and we don't want to get stagnant, and that's what sacredness is for. It helps us reach to the very edge of our capacity, and then come back home and understand, okay, how did we get there? How did we do? Can we do it better next time?
Speaking of sacredness and music, that band Heilung,
Oh, perfect example.
yo, that stuff will, like, first off, okay, you'll go through, you'll be riveted first off and looking and just like,
almost a little horrified. even,
yeah,
like,
because
freaked out
like
or
Heilung
awe.
is very, like, you know, Northern European pagan shamanistic traditions.
so
So, you know, they're
using
wearing
skulls
horns,
and-
and you got guys that
yeah.
are like, and, you know, like, and doing the real
Viking
deep,
mode and-
like, throat chanting strangeness, but like it's eerily beautiful and then powerful, and then the emotions behind it, like you know, like you feel like something that's been lost for such a long time has come back
There's
into
something
you.
ancient in there, and then there's this beauty as well that's being communicated.
And they're definitely participating in something very, not sacred, but sacredness
Feels
of
close
the
to home, close to nature.
Yeah, and they're, you know, they're actually using a dead language. I forget specifically which one, but, you know, the old runic language, and they're speaking the poems in that language as well, which, you know, that language is a very sonically alive language. Like English is sonically dead. Like our vowels don't make shapes in sand. They don't like, you know, does nothing. Whereas, like, you know, like like French has a little bit of that, you know, like, but certain
natural
sounds
sound
and
that actually
vowels,
has a vibration
Hebrew as well is a sonically alive language,
That's
and
interesting.
Arabic as well too.
Yeah.
So it literally manipulates matter. So it's cool to hear music going through that, and it gives you these feelings. It's very strange and horrifying, but you know, elating and freeing and homing at the same time.
Yeah.
So
Puts you
music
in a
can
state
be
of
that.
awe. Yeah. Yeah, we're using the word horrifying because it's on the cusp of the thing that we're trying to talk about. Awe is probably a good word for it, because it is on the verge of being like destabilizing almost.
I
Like,
mean,
what is this? I haven't seen this before.
if you're a very sheltered, very conservative Christian
I was
person,
about to
you
say,
watch this,
that might
you
be a
would
little bit
probably
horrifying.
think these are like
That's
devils and this is the work of Satan.
Yeah, right.
Because it literally sounds, at some point, sounds like demons.
Yeah.
But that's the point of certain portions of the song, because maybe they're talking about
That's what
a battle that happened eons ago. That's the story of the history of their peoples or
and
something
maybe there is
like
some
that.
demiurge that gets to speak at some point, and you hear its
Yeah.
voice. And
So Hai Lung, if you want to get that, see how music can really participate in sacredness, and these people are intentionally doing that as well. They're doing it as like a shamanistic experience with people, for the purposes of bringing back old ways of meaning making and such.
Sure.
It's really Hai Lung also means healing, so
I
that's
love
their that's their whole shtick.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah, there is ultimately, you can feel that underlying sense of grace.
But talk about original, man. I like,
Super original. Yeah.
and I'll listen to stuff that's like
really creative.
they kind of sound like Mongolian hard metal bands. Like, it's funny how like that style of music, it's very original and unique, but you can hear
The influences.
well, it's somehow because like pretty far from Mongolia and that tradition, but still like there's some familiarity of this ancient kind of thing going on in there.
Something in our tribal past that we can pick up on.
Yeah. Back when there was much less of us and much less diversity in form. Back when we were many fewer tribes.
And less diversity in music too.
Yeah, and that like the core nugget, and then fractures bar. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent.
That's a fun tangent to go on, though. That's a good one. Yeah. So music, we recognize how it's become trivialized to some degree. In regards to our connection to it nowadays as well, we don't go to music for something sacred necessarily all the time. Sometimes we're just going for entertainment. But we do recognize how it always helps us when we're troubled in life, because it does reconnect us with the sense of the sacred. So even if you're the most nihilistic person on the planet, and you still, when you're really down, and you listen to a certain song, it can help reconnect you. We go to music, we hunger for music sometimes because of that reason. We don't know why we're doing it, but it is because it is connecting us with that sense of sacredness that homes us from horror, that brings us back home even in the face of horror. So music is for its own sake. It's a way to represent the sacred that evokes the being mode. It gives us a perspectival sense and participatory sense and way of relating, and deep transformation can come through it as it helps elucidate somehow our agent arena relations, our relationship with reality as the person we are with the world and the people that we're in and around. Somehow music speaks on that deep, deep level that can reconnect us. And on that note, did you have anything else yourself?
Nope.
All right, we're going to jump back in for the final section of this episode. All right, guys, let's go. Going to rewind a little bit here.
Aspects to them also are rich with the symbolic machinery that is designed to activate and seriously play with this. So I want to talk about the relationship or the role that symbols have in our experience of sacredness. So the important thing is how we're going to use this word, and symbol originally means to put two things together. And I want to distinguish this. The talk that I did with Chris that you'll see, one of the talks also distinguishes between a symbol and a sign. So I won't go into great detail here. This is sort of central in semiotic, because we use this term in multiple ways, like we talk about abstract symbolic thought, But then we talk about, the cross as an important religious symbol, and we can get very quickly confused. And so a sign refers, right? So it by looking at it, we can look through it to look at something else. So I can use this as a sign for love, because when you see this, it helps you to think of love. But this doesn't actually exemplify. Symbols refer, right? But more importantly, they exemplify in a particular way. They exemplify by getting you to participate in that to which they refer. They're going to invoke, of course, participatory knowing, because they have to do ultimately with getting down to the machinery of the agent-arena participatory relationship. So compare this as a sign for love, and this is something, as I said, that Chris and I did, to kissing someone, because kissing someone doesn't just make you think of love, it actually gets you to participate, it activates and gets the machinery. Kissing is, and I mean this carefully, is serious play with the machinery of the agent-arena relationship, so that we can participate in a reciprocal relationship with another human being, where we are, right, where there's reciprocal realization occurring between us. We can together remember the being mode, etc. So there's a difference there. I want to try and unpack this a little bit more. Symbols do this sort of double job, and they do this by having at their core a metaphor. Now we've got to slow down here, because this is also something that needs to be understood a little bit more carefully. And we've talked about this before, about the word metaphor is itself a metaphor. It means to carry over or carry across. What I'm doing in a metaphor is I have two different domains, and I want to see this domain differently. So I basically look through, this is at least the theory of Black, I look through this thing to look at this. So I'm saying that Sam is a pig, here's Sam, here's a pig. I put on sort of pig glasses, sorry for that, and then I look at Sam differently, and there's the salient topography of Sam is altered, or Tony talks about this in Salience imbalance, and that reconfiguration of what I find salient in Sam allows me to see Sam differently. I get an insight into Sam. And of course, I'm not actually claiming that Sam is a pig, and I'm not just comparing and saying Sam is like a pig. I'm doing this act of looking through and seeing this, and thereby getting an insight into it in an important way. That's fine. Okay. Now, we have to understand, first of all, how pervasive and profound metaphor is, because we have a tendency to think of it, again, as largely ornamental. Our culture is so beset comprehensively by patterns of trivialization. Again and again and again, you hear me say, we have trivialized this, we have trivialized that. Okay, we've talked about this, but I want to bring it back and develop it a little bit, how much of our thinking, and this goes to the work of Lakoff and Johnson, but I'll criticize it in a minute, and also somebody who I'm going to talk about later, Barfield, right? That we don't realize how much of our cognition, our ways of thinking and interacting with the world are being structured by metaphor. So, right, to use an example, I'm halfway through this lecture as if I was moving through a space. But I hope you get my point, or at least see what I'm saying. But you might not be able to, because some of the stuff I'm saying is really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to get my point. But I hope you understand me. It used to be unterstand, by the way, stand within, but we changed it to understand, stand under. It's interesting, right? Even, right, even words that you don't realize are metaphorical, have a metaphorical origin, like interest, remember this? Inter esse, to be within something. So we're often, see, we're much more naturally poetic than we realize. We are constantly trying to do this, use one thing, look through one thing at another. Now, I have some criticisms of Lakoff and Johnson because they argue that what it is I have some embodied practice, and then that just gets projected up into abstract thought. And so one of their prototypical examples is, well, I'll say things like, he attacked my argument, right? And that's supposed to be from the hallmark of, abstract thought. That's from argumentation, where we're at our most rational. But we're actually using this word attacked, right? Which goes back to, physical assault. And the idea is we take what we have here and we project it onto here. I think this notion of projection is too simplistic. Okay? But this is the basic idea. I know what this is because it's embodied physical interaction, it's participatory, right? I know what it is to attack somebody, and then I use that, right? I sort of just project that onto the abstract conceptual domain, and that's how I get he attacked my argument. This reminds me of a point in Barfield. Barfield says, you read in the old text, and they'll use words like pneuma, right, which stands either for wind or spirit, and we can only hear it one way or the other, and that's why we break it into two words. I sort of get what Barfield's saying here, but the point is we use this word, right? And we move between these without realizing it. Like we attacked the castle, and he attacked my argument. And those aren't the same, but we may actually not notice that we're using them differently. Now, why do I say that? Well, this is work that I published, a couple articles with John Kennedy, where we said this simple model of just projecting doesn't seem quite right, because this, for example, carries with it, I can say I attacked the castle or I assaulted the castle, right? But if I say I assaulted his argument, it's like, what? What does that mean? That's weird. The near synonym doesn't transfer. And notice the reverse, abstract thought. Instead of saying I attacked his argument, I can say I criticized his argument. But if I say, let's criticize the castle, you don't, what? That sounds like a weird Monty Python routine. See, what I'm trying to show you is there isn't a simple sort of identity relation. We didn't just project this. And it's not that, right, we're just sort of trapped between two meanings. We seem to clearly have a sense of this that points downward towards the physical assault and then points upwards, if you'll allow me these metaphors, towards the conceptual. Notice also something else. Notice the three things I used earlier. I used, did you see my point? Do you grasp what I'm saying? Do you understand it? Right? Do you get it? These are very different interactions. These are very different things. There's seeing, there's understanding, there's getting, and there's grasping. And yet, all of those independently converge towards making something intelligible, right? The act of making something intelligible. What selected these four very different things and drew them up to their common converged meaning? See, what I'm trying to show you is it's not simply that this gets projected up. There's also something up here that's constraining and acting downward, helping us select which of all of our embodied existence we are going to use for our more abstract, conceptual topics. All right, so why is that important? Because I think that points towards a different way of understanding what the metaphor is doing. So there, of course, is an element of projecting, if projecting means to throw, but I think there's something much more complicated and interesting going on in a metaphor that isn't simply projection, which is, of course, itself a metaphor. Okay, so I think that symbols are going to tap into these deeper kinds of metaphors, not just the metaphors that are the ornamentations of language. These are the metaphors, these more profound metaphors that are structuring our cognition. And I'm trying to point out to you that they have not only a bottom-up emergence, they have a top-down emanation going on in them. There's a sense in which both sides are interacting in a powerful way. We need a much more dynamic account of what's at work in metaphor. So let's build towards that dynamic account. And we've already gained something, that symbols are going to be making use of these profound metaphors. The metaphors that are not just metaphors of speech, but are structuring the way we are making sense, making meaning of the world. Now, one important point of these kinds of metaphors that triggers on the participation, gets into the profundity, but doing something with it, is one of the jobs of these metaphors, right, is to hold in mind. Okay. So let me give you, right, an example of this. We care about justice. We really do. It's important to us. Our culture, in fact, is really wrestling with what does justice mean and how do we best serve it? How do we best realize it? But that means you need to be able to reflect on justice. You need to be able to contemplate it, to think about it. If you're going to think about it and not just emote or assert about it, if you're going to think about it, you need to hold it in mind. But how do you hold it in mind? If I were to ask you, without repeating the word justice, hold justice in mind. Do it. Hold, like, what are you doing? Right? You might be holding sort of a prototypical instance, but when I do this, and I do this repeatedly with my class, what people tell me is, well, when they want to sort of contemplate justice so they can reflect on it and get clearer about what it means to them, they often invoke a symbol. They invoke the symbol of the woman, blindfolded, holding a sword, carrying, right, holding the scales. So one of the things you're noting is that this, of course, is a profound metaphor. We use the notions of balance all throughout our talk about justice. We also use the sword as deciding, cutting, right? But let's stick with the balance. This allows us to hold justice in mind. That's like, stop, pause. If that's all the symbol was doing, that in and of itself is such a valuable thing we need to pause and appreciate. If I can't relate to justice in a participatory fashion where I can engage in it and I'm trying to internalize it and I'm trying to get clearer about it, I can't do any of that unless I can activate it and hold it in mind. And I need a symbol to do that. Now, the symbol is metaphorical. Justice isn't literally a scale, a balance. What's going on here? And what's right? And how does it plug into where I'm trying to argue there's something more than just projection going on? And this gets me to a notion that I've mentioned to you before. Acceptation. This really important work. You got to read his book by Michael Anderson on this. This is the idea that your brain, right, is a self-exaptation machine. not only across species evolutionary, but more recently in his work within a brain in its own development. So to remember the example, my tongue has been exapted for speech. It has a structural functional organization for doing a particular set of tasks, but of course it has, remember the robot and the battery, it has all kinds of side effects, and those side effects are an ongoing reservoir of sets of capacities that I can tap into and make a new structural functional organization to do a new thing, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm speaking. So the tongue has been exapted for speech. And what he's arguing is that a lot of what we see in our cognition is what he calls circuit reuse. Circuits that have been used for one thing get reused, get exapted in the way I've just described by reconfiguring their structural functional organization, right, so that side effects become central effects, right? And what you do is you get a new machine, a new capacity created that way. So let's try and think about this, right? We've got a clear example in the cerebellum, right? The cerebellum originally evolved for helping you to keep your physical balance, right? And what it does is it takes information from many different sense modalities and is constantly looking for how to find patterns of contingency, patterns of relationship between what's happening in my vision, what's happening in my body. And it's really helping to do all this sophisticated coordination and smoothing out so that they start to coordinate together much better. That's your cerebellum. It's centrally involved in your balance. But you know what you've done? The cerebellum has been exapted. It's used not only for finding balance between like my seeing and my moving, it's been exapted to find, right, deeper coordination between any different areas of domain in your brain. The cerebellum also allows you to integrate your vision with your working memory so that you can do visual imagery. Now, let's put this together carefully. You've got this, right, machinery of exaptation. You've got balance. And now what you're doing when you call up the balance idea is you're actually, right, notice your cerebellum has been exapted up to helping you manage massively complex contingencies between variables. You know what you have to do to be a just person? You have to know how to balance. You have to optimize the relationship between, you have to pick up on and coordinate and smooth out the complex interaction between multiple variables. That's justice. You know what you can do if you invoke balance and don't just talk about it, but try and participate in it? You can actually do the reverse of this. You can go back through balance, right, and trigger, activate. You can go from justice through balance back to activating the machinery of the cerebellum. Like normally I am looking through all of that machinery at something. But what I can do with the symbol is, no, I don't want to, I want to actually sort of retrace, reactivate, go back through exaptation and activate the machinery of balance so that I can then use that machinery in order to get an optimal grip on this other domain, which is justice. See, this isn't just simple projection, right? There is not only a projecting up, there is an emanating back down. You're also reversing and going down and trying to reactivate this machinery in an important way. There's a top-down guidance that is intersecting with the bottom-up projection. And so the symbol is in that sense deeply participatory. You are trying to participate in this activation of the very cognitive machinery that is used both in participating in balance, You don't just look at balance. You have to be balanced, perspectively, participatory, and then taking that machinery into being just, having your perspectival and participatory machinery aligned in a certain way. That's what the symbol is doing for you. It is deeply participatory. It allows you to hold in mind and then look back through to activate, and then bring that back up to have insight, participatory and perspectival insight into something like justice. We're going to talk more next time about the symbol and how it relates to our experience of sacredness. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Meow. Ruff, 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 ruff. Meow. Wah. All right, fam. That was awesome. I'm feeling for our DJ over here because he is definitely in the midst of nicotine withdrawals. And if any of you out there have ever tried or actually succeeded in quitting smoking cigarettes or nicotine addiction, you know it's a miserable experience.
So the difference between
You're doing it there, brother. You're doing well.
the difference between sign and symbol.
Yeah.
So the sign is referential, but in a non-example way. You know, you draw a heart. That okay, that's a sign that points to love, but really, it's not love. It's not a good example of love. It's not even a good example of the human heart.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's just referring.
Whereas the symbol, which means to put two things together, is referenced by participation.
Mm-hmm. It exemplifies rather than just refers by evoking a sense of participation with what they represent. So you have the act of kissing. Vervaeke goes into this now, and he calls this serious play because the partners are participating in a reciprocal relation with another human being to together remember the being mode and to relish and revel in the being mode together.
So at symbol's core is metaphor. And he really points to how pervasive and profound metaphor is. It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
Every word that we use.
Just about, yeah. And so we're actually very poetic beings without even knowing it, because we are always using poetic terms. We're always using these metaphors.
You feel me? No, that's creepy. No, I don't mean that, man.
Actually, literally, no, I didn't just feel you. Yeah, we look through metaphors to see. And to see, we mean to understand, right? There is a metaphor to see.
Well, there's another one, to understand.
And to understand, which used to be interstand. Yeah. Helps us to see differently.
Understand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Gives us an insight. They're pervasive and profound. We don't realize how much of reality is structured by metaphor.
Yeah.
Something is interesting because it is an interactive essay. It's to be in something, to be involved by something. We're constantly doing this, looking through one thing into another, or to help describe another. Like, this is the frame of perspective I'm coming from. So I'm using this metaphor of a frame of perspective to give you an impression of this is the way that I'm seeing this thing that I'm trying to, this is the angle I'm looking at it from. Angle is another metaphor there. It's all visual based or movement based or some kind of embodying animated way. Go on. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, just metaphor. So the limitations of metaphorical projection, in the sense of, like, he was bringing up, you attacked my argument. Well, how do we know? Like, well, we know that you didn't necessarily mean, you beat up my argument or stabbed it laid siege to it or
Yeah, like you
whatever.
attack a castle or something.
Use the other word. What is it? Numina, like wind and spirit.
Pneuma.
We don't pneuma. We don't use them at the same time to mean wind or spirit. It also refers to lung as well. Like pneumonia. So projection isn't enough, and we seem to use many different metaphors that are all different, but are all pointing to the same thing. And what is that?
Yeah, do you get what I'm saying?
And what is that thing that holds all them together to? Well, I guess what is relevant to each one of these words. Do you get what I'm
Because there's something specific you're trying to say when you're using a metaphor. So to really help the other person narrow in on what you're trying to say, we use very specific words that mean certain things in certain contexts. So I can say, do you get what I'm saying? Do you see? So get what I'm saying. See what I mean. Do you grasp it? Do you understand it? And all of these converge towards making something intelligible, making something more intelligible. So it's like we're focusing together when we use metaphors in on something. So it's not just a bottom-up emergence or a top-down convergence. It's both happening at once. It's an interesse. It actually is, though, a reciprocal process. It's another opponent processing that we're seeing happening. And we're seeking here a dynamic account of metaphors. That's why we're going through all of this. What is the brain doing in this process, in this part of the relevance realization?
Yeah, so it's finding the balance, because like you're not literally attacking somebody. Like I feel attacked.
Yeah.
Well, you don't actually feel like bruised and battered and beaten.
Yeah.
So
But the idea is being offended, or I'm being offended.
Well, you've got a symbol now, attacked, so there's some type of, transgression.
We use attack because we take our ideas personally.
Yeah. And
That
so
makes sense.
that gets it. So a metaphor is you could say, I know it's kind of inverse, but you could say a metaphor is a symbol as well to hold place for an idea that can't necessarily be held without a word.
Mm-hmm.
So we use symbol, like symbols.
Symbolic terms.
Instead of the name Jupiter, the planet, and whatever, and where it is in the sky, there's a shape that we use for it. And then we combine them with other things, and that's our base understanding of time and how things move around and yada, yada, yada. Magic, symbols. It's not just, there's power in this symbol for the sheer sake that, this squiggly line has some power in it. It's like, no, what does it mean?
What does it mean?
What does it mean? What
like
is
the lightning?
What is the idea to
see
be held into the in the mind?
It means power, for instance. That's right. What idea am I trying to project for you or help you to get to understand?
Well, and also, so like, say you're driving, right, and you're thinking about a lot of things, and instead of having a sign that says, "Please slow down here because there are pedestrians that may or may not be crossing." No, we have a sign that's like a yield for pedestrians and has people walking, and that's it. Mm-hmm. It's a placeholder for a concept that's much longer than we can, or the explanation of is much longer than we could hold in our head for, usable, or not for, but in a usable way.
Right. You couldn't hold all of the space and all the detail of that stretch of land.
Well, you have a stop sign
in your mind.
Okay, it says stop, but we don't say like, as soon as I see it, stop. No, it's stop here, and if it says four-way,
I don't know what I was thinking.
Stops.
I was seeing one of those green signs that shows you 14 miles to this city, 24 miles to that city, but stop sign too.
Well, those are symbols too, and then you get into sacred symbology and the importance of what is the meaning behind, say, like sacred symbols. Why are certain beast referenced as having so many horns, or why we depict in old art certain positions of the body? What does that mean? Is it the right hand doing it, or is it the left? Because one is pleasure and one is pain. So
one's the angel, one's the devil.
And if you get sophisticated enough with metaphor and symbol, you can encode a lot of information in, say, one painting.
Very small.
or one very small set of words.
That's right.
It's almost like a secret code, if you will, but your brain already kind of does this in its own way.
Yeah, well, we're always doing this
Naturally.
because every time that we speak, we're using a metaphor to convey what we mean. In every sentence, there's always metaphors. And so it's a constant process.
Yeah.
We really are poets at heart. That's
Well,
so
the
cool.
fruits of your labor. I'm not like you're not literally a fruit farmer, but we've heard that, so much we know what it mean. Oh, the fruits of my labor. Oh, that means I've done stuff and I'm going the results of what I do.
Yeah.
But it's a lot quicker than being like, well, all that, all your preparation that you've done over life is going to pay off, and you're going to get many different things, like, the fruits of your labor, man. Oh,
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. I earned this by the fruit of my labor. So he goes over the word justice. How do you symbolize something like that? And then we remember that statue with the blindfold, and she's holding the scales. So she's weighing evenly no matter what, based upon what she hears, not what she would prefer to see. And that's a beautiful explanation, because what's happening here is when we're using symbols and metaphors, we're exacting. Again, it's a circuit reuse, basically. In the brain, we can exact something to do something else, like our tongues, which are there to be able to taste to see if there's poison or something in what we're eating, to move things around in the mouth while we're chewing. But all of those side effects of what a tongue can do can become central effects for using it to manipulate the voice for actual language and speech. And so,
Yeah, so
Vervaeke,
the tongue can test what is poison, and then we exact it to be able to tell other people, hey, that's poison.
yeah, exactly.
I know it's poison, and now I can tell you it's poison.
We wanted so badly to be able to convey that idea that of what we had just tasted, and we knew that it was going to hurt someone else. We eventually did come up with language, first symbols, first sounds, and hand signals, a lot of it. But we did eventually get to language somehow. And it was, we wanted to for so long that we figured it out. So the brain can exact different parts of itself for new uses. So all of the machinery, quote unquote machinery, all the neural networking around the tongue's ability to move itself can be exacted into language, vocal manipulation for the use of being able to utilize speech. And as such, the cerebellum, which is originally evolved for just central balance, so it's optimizing our central balance. It's not just the inner ear, it's also taking in all these visual cues from visual sensors and auditory sensors, and it's bringing everything together,
Pressure, velocity,
and achieving an even more refined sense of central balance.
and it's not just
So it's coordinating many different sensors that we have.
and it's no longer just used for the balance of the physical body, but the balance of our contextual and conceptual
capacities for memory.
The word is it's an easy word. Landscape. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No, but like it's a balancing of our landscape of understanding and where you put symbols in your mind. And you're using, I guess, according to the guy who knows about the brain and other people who know about the brain, I guess the cerebellum is also balancing our logic and what is real and what is not. Using older, brain technologies, older technologies, same hardware, same everything else, even pretty much the same software, just re-updating it for
reusing those circuits for something new.
Well, even, like say he mentioned, being able to use memory and eyesight to be able to have an inner working space of visualizing. Now, some people can't, what's it called, like aphantasia or something like that, where they have no inner eye at all.
Yeah, but you can like practice a game of solitaire that you were doing at home or something while you're like driving the car even, and you're, oh, that's right, the queen was there, blah, 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 blah.
If you're good enough.
If you're good enough at it. But that's a good practice that you can utilize to build up the inner eye too.
But particularly in that space, you can hold a massive amount of information with very few symbols that you can hold in your head. There's many different mystery schools that teach you how to do this, and
Yeah.
a lot of their art
Remember
and
that
symbolism.
Kabbalist technique using the what is it called? The tree
Yeah, the
Sephiroth or something like.
I
No, that
think
sounds like a
Sephiroth
Final
is from
Fantasy
Final
character.
Fantasy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Similar to that. It's a close word
basically
to that.
it's a thing, like it's a thing that holds the tree, the seed, and all forms of it, self in itself at different stages within itself. Not explaining it too good.
We're gonna show a picture next episode.
Yeah,
I can't find one right now.
but unfortunately, my without the nicotine, my brain is having a hard time recalling stuff and doing stuff. You know, turns out I've been taking a what do you call it, a nootropic for a long time, and now I don't got it, and I'm stupid. Turns out all my intelligence came from the cigarettes.
It does help you focus a bit and concentrate, and people that are often diagnosed with what they call ADD,
Yeah, well,
it helps us focus a little bit. So that's a reason it can become quite addictive. I remember when I got off the Ritalin as a kid, I started smoking cigarettes, and now it makes sense. So yeah, I did find. Let's see if I can. Perfect. There it is. Let me blow this up on the other screen. I gotta pull this over here.
blow it up. There's another metaphor and symbol for you.
Yeah, right.
Now, is that blow it up like
There we
boom
go.
or blow it up like a balloon?
Yeah, I'm blowing it up like a balloon, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not showing it. What the heck?
Oh,
Let me see. Oh, because that's full screen still. Let's get that off full screen.
such and things and such and all this
Yeah.
stupid technology.
I'll clean it up in the post.
Still can't see it.
Still can't see it.
Because you have it on screen capture, probably just to that window.
Ah, you're right. You are right. Okay.
Well,
so-
basically, look up the Kabbalah tree of life, or but at its basic core, it's a small world networking system of symbols and placements that you can use to keep track of massive amounts of information.
That's right. I'm gonna get it. I know how to do it now. I just did it. Boom.
And I'm
There
no
it is.
expert, so I can't tell you,
So
what
it's
each
1, 2,
node means and everything. But you can use this nodular system, and I have a
Yes.
one that's somewhat similar that I use in my own head to keep track of things. It's just my weird way.
Yeah, yeah. However, you can find you can hold in your head. So what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 nodes. You could just do these 8 right here, and then you can start adding as you're able to. But you could use this to memorize any number of things that you need to do in a day, for instance, or steps to a process that you need to complete.
Or
It's great mnemonic advice.
abstract relationships between things that aren't necessarily obviously connected.
Mm-hmm.
Or like sometimes, being able to hold a space for a pseudo known or a pseudo unknown. Like it's like, it doesn't really fit into anything, so I can just put it over here and it can sit over here for a little bit, that kind of. But, so the symbol, it's important. There's a lot of
Powerful.
there's a lot of nonsense like symbolatry, and and by that I just mean like the kitschy, look at this thing and it's really cool, and not much more into it. Or and sorry Wiccans, but I'm gonna knock you because not even a real religion. It was made by a guy who just wanted to get with the ladies and manipulate and control them. But anyway, like the Wiccan, like I'm going to draw the symbol and I'm a witch and I'm going to do these things. Which first off, don't go doing that, because there's some power behind these things and you don't want to meet the things that you might be summoning or crafting or doing whatever with, even if it is just in your head. There's a reason why, like,
There's an homage there, I think, in the founding of Wicca, even if the guy was trying to get with. It's definitely an homage to and trying to reimagine or remember these ancient wisdom practices that we'd lost touch with, which is an unfortunate story.
It's not.
But it's not the continuation
It's not grounded in anything
of the
real. It's
previous
more,
pagan
yeah,
mythologies
It's a
that the Wiccan, some of
It's
the
a
Wiccan
picked,
ideas
it's
draw
a picked
from.
and chosen type of.
It's an imperfect attempt to recapitulate those old ways.
Yeah,
But pagan is just a word for not one kind of religion, but for a bunch of different kinds of folk,
yeah, I didn't want
local religions that were all.
I didn't want to get too far into that.
Oh,
but,
sure,
but
sure.
the use,
No, it's an important distinction to make, though.
the willy-nilly usage of symbols is not a good thing.
And you make a really good point that we shouldn't use these things for personal, selfish gain, and be very careful of the energies that we're playing with.
Feel free to use symbology and these techniques for selfish gain, but this idea of I'm going to use an ancient symbol I know nothing about, put it in a way, and do a certain little set of practices without knowing fully what you're getting into.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's the warning that. There in
but
Eastern traditions like Buddhism, they warn against the use of magic for personal interest because it can be very dangerous, and it's for the wise and the adept. And be ready,
well, there's certain things like hey, if you got a business and you want to sell, you can use a good sigil for the name of your store and to catch people's eyes and to draw them in, and use sigil magic's interesting because you can make your own and put intentions into it.
And if your business is something that's designed to be win-win enrichment for the customer and for you, and it's you're not just being greedy and this and that. There's nothing wrong with the use of a symbol there. Or a sigil.
Well, I mean, if it works, it works. Morality aside and all that, but
that's of course true. But we're just warning of there are repercussions for the ill.
Ideally, if you have a business, you want to be a win-win situation because you're not going to last very long. Because contrary to popular belief, just being greedy and having a lot of power does not a good business make.
No, it doesn't make a good business.
The reason why everybody
for the world,
the reason why everybody buys from Amazon or uses Google, and we know all about it, is because they provide a service that we're like, okay, yeah, I feel like I got good enough out of this agreement that I'm going to keep doing it with you.
Yeah, but companies like you could say BlackRock are not in possession of
that's
the
a totally
money
that's a totally different
they're
monster.
Well intended, yeah.
That's a totally different bag of
it's because they're
tricks
using
there.
Oh yeah, well,
and I wouldn't even call them a business because they're not a bit like necessarily what you'd think of a normal business. They are number shufflers and investment.
Well, what I'm pointing to is that sometimes companies monopolize too. So
I'm sure
we definitely have that situation where there is a misuse of power symbols for just purely greedy personal gain because they work.
Yep.
But the degradation and destabilization and imbalance that they end up causing.
But they have a third of the world's wealth, and
Yeah.
that's the first third that's going to disappear if shit hits the fan. Because we don't care about your investments. We don't care about any of that. Okay, yeah, maybe you'll have a lot of investment in materials because they don't actually own it. Like something like that doesn't actually own anything.
The investment is for control.
They just own debt or shares.
Yeah, the investment is to amass power and control.
Which sure, it can be dangerous because whatever BlackRock says with their ESG and all that nonsense that they push forward tends to go for a while. But we're watching that collapse too. Pretty much everybody who's delved into the ESG world as far as a corporate entity is, biting their nails right now as they're watching the ground slide out, if not directly around them, around their neighbors, and it's coming for them too.
Yeah, because it is true that creating that win-win scenario with yourselves and your customers as a business is the most conducive to true long-term survival beyond just like 100 years. We're talking, you want your business to last a real test of time and go 1,000 years into the future. You're going to make it a win-win for the people it's providing.
Yeah, and actually, so down to symbols, whether you're using them for personal gain or not. If you're going to, go ahead, but this is you'll see what happens in the future when you use them, because like ESG is a symbol. It's a symbol for environmental social governance credit score, basically, for a much bigger idea. And like corporations as well as social groups and stuff will use words as symbol, or well, we tend to, at least in the U.S., break everything down into letters that mean words, and then words that mean a whole bunch of other freaking words. But they're using these, symbols like environment. That's a powerful symbol to have in your head. There's a lot of power between environments. We're always on the edge of an environmental catastrophe nowadays. Everything is, it's this huge thing. Social, well, social is huge for us. We're social creatures, but now everything's social justice and social this and social that.
And they're pretend
very powerful.
Yeah, and they're
and
not
then,
necessarily honest representations of what they're pretending to
and
represent.
then G, governance. Well, that's always been the thing, you know. We don't want too much, we don't want too little. And it always seems like we have way too much and then none at all, and then it all, and you know, none at all bloody, horrible, and then try to fix it, and then too much again. And I want to avoid the other end. So, but still, government, powerful symbol. Social, powerful symbol. Environment, powerful symbol. You know, I could go over, you know, like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. These are symbols. They're words, but they're symbols. And they're to mean things. And actually, some of these things mean two things. One thing to the rest of the world, another thing to the people who know what these things mean, who are in on it, or who have studied enough to know what in on it is.
Signifying more than one thing at once.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the symbols have power, a lot of power. So, and my whole thing is, more realistically speaking, is like, you know, you do what you're going to do, but it's going to...
Well, you know, let's put a fair warning out there. Be wise with your use of symbols, because we're trying to live on this planet together. Yeah. So if you go out there doing a bunch of dark magic just because you're power hungry and greedy, and it's...
Or even just curious.
Well, yeah, even just curious and alone and a little bit nihilistic.
But and also the worst harm can come from the best intentions. So,
and you know, then you could be just...
That's where wisdom comes
very
in.
Well intended.
Know when to act and when not to.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, it is a...
Be careful using sigil magic or magic in general.
Yeah.
In fact, probably not use it at all unless you're using it for what you know truly, absolutely is good for one and all, and it's coming from a place of love. And then for sure, you're putting out blessings at that point. You're putting out prayers and blessings with gratitude and appreciation of the world around you, and a shared reciprocal relation.
If you are a maker and you make a maker's mark, that is making a sigil. So figure out like yeah, okay, your maker's mark could just be your initials, but like just the initial stamp. But your maker's mark is something unique that is you too. So you're making a symbol for your craftsmanship. I have a maker's mark. It looks like a rounded window with 4 panes, and then 2 lines coming up to the horizon, kind of like looking out into a road or looking out into the distance. It spells out my name. It spells out a few other things that I hold near and dear.
Yeah.
It's a control sigil for me as well, because you know, after I'm done, I can put it on my thing, and it's good because I've controlled myself all the way through to create whatever it is.
And it is sound, and so this is like the proof of its sound.
Yeah, proof mark, if you will. Or, you know, who did this? They did a terrible job, and look at it and be like, oh yeah, that guy. You know?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, and not to be mystical or nothing, because it could just be a function of the brain and how the brain works, and then the collective brain of everybody works that makes the magic happen.
Well, that's just, you know, that's how we came up with letters and symbols and words in the first place, is that we had just invented sigils. So you'd have like a lightning bolt that you would paint on your skin or on a rock near where you lived, and that's to give the impression of not a lightning bolt, but power, strength, something like that. And that once people understand that that's what's being conveyed by that, once that click happens in their brain for the first time, it's like, whoa, this person is like just painted the power symbol in front of me after I asked them for food, and like they seem angry, and this is like dangerous, and it evokes a lot of meaning. And people that were really good with symbols and knew a lot of symbols and could evoke a lot of different kinds of concepts and emotions in people with those symbols were considered wizards or magicians. And so that's where our first letters came from, was initially magical symbols. They were sigils. Once we started linking them together, many sigils, many spells together to make a larger meaning, we called it spelling. So you link a bunch of sigils together, now you got a word. You got a bunch of letters forming a word. And in this way, and in the way that language itself can so deeply influence and inspire and motivate us, language itself is akin to something magical, or what you would think of when someone casts a spell to get somebody to do something. we certainly can inspire, uplift, change minds, deeply describe something, and give somebody a sense of how it felt to be there from our own perspective using the art of language and stories. So there's a responsibility that comes with this power of language that we now possess. And it is something that works on a scale that is akin to what you think of when you think magic. You think about how words and ideas and memes and stories travel around the world, and they have so much resonance with us. They have so much effect on us.
Yep. Use your symbols wisely.
Yep, fam. Yeah. Yeah, let's
Especially
try and use
the
our words,
sacred-
our speech, our
and the sacred
sigil
ones.
use, and all that with a little bit more wisdom. And that's what we're learning about here on Meaning Making 101. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. And we invite you to join us on next episode and to like and subscribe to the show if you enjoy, and to like and subscribe to John Vervaeke as well. And keep touch with what this guy's up to. He's been on Lex Friedman, Aubrey Marcus's podcast. He's been on Theories of Everything with Kurt Jumungal. He's really starting to reach a lot of these places because he is helping us recognize some of the keys to solving this crisis of culture that we're experiencing right now, this meaning crisis that we are experiencing in our world today. So it's consoling and it's uplifting and very encouraging stuff to run into right now in the midst of this ongoing culture crisis. And I feel very grateful to be able to share with all of you and to have my brother DJ here sharing in this process with me. This has been quite a trek so far. We're 34 episodes through this 50-part lecture series. That was too great for Vervaeke to be able to teach at any university on the planet. So here it is on YouTube for everybody.
For free.
For free, yeah. This couldn't be taught in one semester, obviously. You know?
I won't say it's entirely free because there is the energy expended that your brain has to use, and your brain uses a lot of energy. So bioeconomically speaking, not free, but pocket economically speaking, free.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and this is like brain exercise too. And when you exercise the brain more, it actually becomes more agile and has more endurance, and it can do more. So this is also a strengthening, conditioning practice for our brains and our heart's capacity for wisdom.
My brain feels like mush. I was in the sun. I'm trying to quit smoking. I'm like, man,
you're doing the thing, man.
Yeah, well,
you're at the point of struggling and feeling it, and as much as you are, then I know that you're in the depth of it. So good job, man.
I mean, like I'm angry at this microphone at this point, and it's done nothing except be here.
Just for being.
It's like, you know. Ha!
Oh my God, yeah. The side effects of nicotine withdrawal are actually.
But I'd rather have
agitation. Just doesn't really encapsulate the depth of aggravation you can experience.
Oh, and I'm a deeply angry person just in general, and I always have been. You know, that's like my default mode is anger.
This is kick-ass patience training then.
Oh, yeah. It's like I'm just remembering all the anger management therapy I've been through, and like, you know, one of my anger management therapists, Keith, just being like, "No, Dave, you're angry, and it's okay, but you have to feel the anger."
I like this guy's
Why are
voice.
you angry? Yeah, that's the best I can do. He's just one of those guys who just kind of talks like, "Yeah, okay, real calm."
Why are you angry?
Yeah, you know you're angry, but why are you angry? You tell me, man.
Trying to stop and look to see why you're angry in the midst of anger is a very hard thing to do.
Well, you know, I got a lot of reasons to be angry, and it's best not to what do they call it? Ruminate. If I focus on the things that I'm angry, it's more of postulate solutions, because that's a lot less frustrating than just working yourself into a hole.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if it's like, even if you're angry about something that you have very little control over, just imagining solutions and trying to like think about them, and then maybe you'll come across somebody who had the same idea, and hey, now you got a social movement,
right?
You know,
because emotions like that are strong energy, so they can be an impetus for
that's
doing something else with that energy.
That's what I figured out, you know, after quite a long time of what the anger's for. It's my way of, or it's the gift I've been given to give me impetus to immediately do something that I need to do. Yeah. But it's also the curse of being inflammatory by nature and trying to hold that back and not be a douche.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, like I'll say stuff and I'll be like, I didn't mean to sound like that. but it's just that's the way it came out. Sorry. The point still stands, but I didn't mean to word it like that.
Didn't mean to be so gruff about it.
Yeah. Or just super dry when you're trying not to have any emotions and it just comes out dry. It's like, no, you got to put some back in there. You know, you can't just be like, that dress does not flatter you. You know, you got it's.
You got to add some flavor.
It's like, okay, Vulcan, get out of here. Nobody likes the Vulcans, and that's why. We'd rather have too much emotions like the Klingons than not enough emotions like the Vulcans. It's weird, you know. Emotionless people freak us out, whereas more emotional people is just kind of normal. You know? Yeah, when they're freaking out and raging out, it's not normal, but like being a little bit more emotional.
But we're used to seeing that swing. Yeah, because humans do that.
And that might be, you know, an American thing or just a Western thing, because, you know, like I know in Japan, like emotions are a little less than here, but they still in their own way show them. Like their language is very emotional. You say things differently depending on who you're talking to, what emotion you're having, what, you know, like to emphasize the word.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you know, it hurt isn't just it hurt. It's like it hurt, ha ha ha, it hurt, or it hurt, like take me to the hospital.
Yeah.
You know, so who knows? It's weird. It's not enough emotion, though. It's one of those things that freaks you out because humans are emotional beings. So if it lacks emotion, then it's a monster.
You don't know how to read it.
Yeah, you're like, maybe that's
unsettling. That's why the mask is always unsettling for you when whether it's a ski mask or a bag or whatever it is, any kind of thing that hides the face and hides the emotions makes it indescript to. Is that the word? Nondescript? Makes it hard for us to make out whatever we're looking at is thinking or feeling. Yeah. And so it freaks us out. We don't like seeing that.
You can't even tell where it's looking in some cases, like, you know, like the Slenderman, or like the idea of like a person in a suit with no face.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like no features on their face, you know, freak you out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you can't tell where it's looking. Like, even if it had a scary face, at least that's better than no face.
Even in the Matrix, you know, it's just Agent Smith has just got the shades on that hides his face, but he's always expressionless as well. You can't tell where he's looking. You can't tell what he's feeling.
He has one expression. It is smug.
Oh, that's right.
Mr. Anders.
Yeah.
You know, just it's just, you know, these humans, they're disgusting. You know,
yeah, I forgot about that aspect of them. That was really clever. That's a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Good allegory of the cave story.
Yeah.
All right, fam. Well, we're going to let y'all go, and we're going to wind on down ourselves. Love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time, Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST.
Meow.